AI is coming for your job, my job, all our jobs. I know that's what you're afraid of. I know that's the headline that keeps surfacing. I know some of you have already felt it. The restructure, the reduced headcount, the role that got quietly absorbed into a tool that costs a fraction of a human salary and never calls him sick. I want to talk about that. But I also want to tell you something I've been sitting with for months. Something that started with a conversation in a kitchen with a colleague who was frightened. Because here's my honest reaction when I think about AI coming for my job. Thank fuck for that. And I want to explain why I mean that, and why I think you might feel the same way if you sit with it long enough. For anyone new here, quick intro. I'm Aimee, 42, Sydney lawyer, 20 years of practice, building a suite of AI-powered YouTube channels, trying to exit my 9-to-5 by February 2027, documenting the whole thing in public. I have a channel called Renaissance because I believe AI will bring in a new renaissance for humanity. My voice isn't my real voice. Australian. Still looking. A while ago, a colleague, I'll call her Sarah, cornered me in the kitchen at work. She had that look, the one where someone has been chewing on something alone for a while and finally has to say it out loud. She said, "But Aimee, if AI takes all our jobs, won't we just lose our purpose? What happens to human dignity when we can't work anymore?" I could see she wasn't really asking about economics. She was asking something much more personal than that. She'd spent her whole adult life inside an institution. She'd built her identity around what she did for a living. Her sense of being useful, of mattering, of having a place in the world, it was entirely wrapped up in showing up to that building and doing that job. And someone taking that away wasn't just a financial threat, it was an existential one. And I understood that fear completely, because I'd felt a version of it myself. I'd had the same story running in the background, that my value was the credential, the role, the institution I was attached to, that without those things, I'd be less of something. But standing in that kitchen, something clicked for me that I hadn't quite put into words before. Sarah wasn't afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of discovering that the job was the only purpose she'd ever had. And those are very different fears. One is about security. The other is about identity. And the AI conversation keeps treating them as the same thing, when they're not. Here's the thing about what we call purpose at work. Most of it isn't purpose. It's survival activity with better marketing. Think about how much of your actual working day involves things you'd choose to do if rent wasn't due this week. The meetings that are status updates in disguise. The reports nobody reads. The processes designed by a committee to serve the committee. The work that stopped challenging you 3 years ago and you're still showing up for because the salary lands on the 28th. We've conflated two things that are actually separate. The activity that pays for survival and the meaning we attach to it to make it bearable. For most of human history, those things were separate. It's only in the industrial era that we started treating them as one thing. The job as the purpose, the career as the identity, the role as the self. And we made that conflation because we had to, because the factory needed workers, and the corporation needed employees, and the institution needed people who showed up reliably and followed the rules. And if you wanted to eat, you complied. You made yourself smaller, more manageable, more employable. You sandpapered down the edges that didn't fit the box, and you called it professionalism. The deal was, give us 40+ hours a week of your finite life, and we'll give you enough security to build a life around the edges. And most people took that deal, because the alternative was harder and scarier and didn't come with superannuation. I took that deal, for 20 years. Here's what that deal actually costs, and I don't think we say this clearly enough. 40+ hours a week of survival activity leaves you with whatever's left. The energy that remains after you've done the job, navigated the politics, managed the performance reviews, absorbed the restructures, smiled through the meetings. For most people, that remainder is small, and it goes into the kids, the commute, the recovery from the week, the vague ambition to do something different someday when the timing is better. I know what it costs because I've been paying it. I've watched colleagues get to retirement and discover they don't know what they are outside the role. I've watched people with extraordinary creative intelligence spend it on projects that don't matter to anyone, including them, because that's what the institution needed this quarter. I felt my own curiosity narrow over years into whatever was professionally relevant, and everything else getting slowly deprioritized until someday was the only address it had. And here's the thing about Sarah's question: what happens to human dignity without work? She's assuming that the current arrangement is the one that has dignity in it. She's assuming that trading your finite time for a salary, subordinating your curiosity and creativity to whatever the institution needs, showing up day after day to work that stopped challenging you years ago, that this is the dignified version. I want to respectfully suggest it isn't. And I want to suggest that what AI is actually threatening isn't human dignity. It's the version of ourselves we built to survive inside systems that were never designed with our full humanity in mind. There's a content creator called Alexa Suranoia who made a video recently that's been sitting with me. She talks about the AI job displacement conversation in terms of what she calls an identity revolution. The idea that for the first time in human history, becoming more of yourself is the survival strategy, rather than becoming less of yourself. Her thesis is that the industrial deal, fit in, shrink, comply, is dying because the machine is being automated. And instead of that being a catastrophe, it's an invitation to come back to who you actually are. I think she's right, and I think she's pointing at something important that the doom misses. The psychological framework that helps me think about this is Maslow's hierarchy. You've probably encountered it. The idea is that human needs exist on a pyramid: survival and safety at the base, then belonging and connection, then esteem, then at the top, what Maslow called self-actualization, the full expression of who you actually are. The deal most of us have been living keeps us trapped in the bottom two layers: survival, then safety. We earn enough to survive and enough to feel relatively secure, and we spend so much energy maintaining both that the upper layers never really become available. The creativity, the meaning, the full expression, those are for the weekend, for retirement, for someday. What AI does, if we let it, if we don't just replace the work with more work, is free up bandwidth for the upper layers. Not because AI is charitable, but because the survival activity that used to require human time is getting faster and cheaper, and doesn't need all of us in the same way it did. What do we actually do when we're not doing survival activity? Because I think Sarah's fear that we'll lose our purpose has a real kernel of truth in it that's worth taking seriously. It's not that purpose disappears without work. It's that a lot of people don't know what their purpose is outside of work because they've never had the sustained space to find out. The work filled the hours, and the hours filled the identity, and there was never enough left over to do the inquiry. The people who know what they do without the job are the ones who already have a rich inner life that runs alongside the work, separate from it. They have creative projects that matter to them, communities they belong to that aren't professional, curiosity that goes in directions the job doesn't require. A lot of people don't have that, not because they're incapable of it, but because the deal they made didn't leave room for it. So when I say thank fuck for that, when I say I welcome AI coming for the parts of my work that are survival activity, I'm not saying it from a place of having it figured out. I'm saying it from a place of watching what happens when I actually have time to find out what I do without the constraint. I've spent the last few months building something that has nothing to do with what my institution needs me to do. About 1 billion channels, some products attached to those channels, overall a suite of infrastructure that gets more useful every week. And I'm not doing it because it's the safe choice or the obvious career move. I'm doing it because when I stopped filling all available hours with survival activity, this is what I found underneath. This specific curiosity. This particular compulsion to build something of importance and document it and share what I find. That's what was waiting. If I could go back to that kitchen conversation, here's what I'd say to Sarah. You're not afraid of losing your job. You're afraid of finding out that you don't know who you are outside of it. And that's a real fear, and a fair one. But the solution isn't to protect the job. It's to start, now, while you still have the security of the income, to build the inner life that doesn't depend on the institution, to find the thing that would still be true about you if the role disappeared tomorrow, to start doing the inquiry into what you'd spend your time on if survival wasn't the constraint. Because here's what I know. The answer exists. It always exists. You've always had a self that's separate from the role, even if the role has been occupying most of the space. The question is whether you get to discover it now with some time and intention, or whether you discover it later, when the decision gets made for you. AI is coming for the jobs, the survival activity, the hours we trade for security. That's real, and it's happening faster than most people are tracking. And my honest, considered, not naive about what's being lost response to that is still the same. Thank fuck for that. Now let's find out what we actually are. I'm Aimee. This is Renaissance. Now, go play.